All right. So here it is. Let's see if I can play it.
Yeah.
And we're the second crime scene pistol.
Yeah. So then how do we get back to, I guess, how do we get back to zero there? And that's an analogy for all of it. Like, how do we pull this thing back? We're about to get.
So you're talking about coronavirus.
No,
Like
I'm not talking about all of it. Right now, you have the new, what is it? Trying to make it into the Civil Rights Act, the Equality Act. You know, like, you know, how do you turn this back?
Well, one of the things, either there's going to be a Reformation revival of a massive, like hot gospel preaching.
Yeah.
Reformation revival, people coming to Christ. And that's going to do it. Or it's going to crash and burn. Those, and crashing and burning is one of the ways out.
It
So,
can be
or a costly.
costly. Yeah.
So Stein, I think his name is Herbert Stein. Stein's law is anything that cannot continue on indefinitely won't.
Okay.
Right, and what they're currently doing to use is unsustainable.
Right.
It's absolutely unsustainable. We've fallen off the skyscraper, and we're at the 17th floor now, and we're doing irresponsible things on the way down.
Yeah. Right.
Remember too, like the way that the Roman Empire it crumbled.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got Constantine, you've got a bunch of, the empire sort of ostensibly becoming Christian, professing Christ. You've got the end of pagan worship. And at the same time, even as Christianity is coming into its own with all of its influence, the empire is crumbling.
Right.
And this is why Augustine had to write his book, The City of God, because all the Christians were saying, wait a second, is God with us or not? Why is the empire crumbling?
Right.
And Augustine says, well, no, the empire is still full of sin and paganism, and that's what causes it to crumble. And it's not the Christian's fault. Right. And the city of God is not synonymous with the city of man. And even as the empire crumbles and crashes and burns, so to speak, it's sort of this, it's a way that Christianity then begins actually spreading even further into Europe.
Yeah, there's Christianity being.
And he goes on for a little bit longer, but basically he mentions Rome, and he says, Rome crashed and burned, but you know what? The gospel spread pretty hard through that. Who's that? Augustine? Constantine's mother, yeah. And then he made the Edict of Milan that said that now we're going to tolerate Christianity. So just interesting how we have a parallel line, it seems like. And notice what the pastor said. Either there's going to be a massive revival or we're just going to crash and burn. But if we crash and burn, a revival will come from that. Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah, both. Or a little bit of both. Yeah, or a lot of both. Have y'all ever read Flannery O'Connor's The Turkey? Great Southern writer. A masterpiece. It involves a boy who finds an injured turkey, and he imagines this very large turkey slumped across his shoulder as he parades through the small town. All the other boys from school come up and go, "Man, you're awesome. How did you shoot it?" And he'd have this elaborate story. "Well, you should have seen it." He had this in his mind. And sure enough, true to form, he gets the turkey. He does parade it through town. The boys come up to him and wonder. They start asking him questions. "How did you get it?" He starts making up a story. "That doesn't sound right." "Well, that's kind of cool though. Man, you must be some hunter," they said. "Oh yeah, you should have seen it." He attains acceptance from this group of boys for just a second. They do look at one another as he answers, and they are amazed for just a second. But the story ends with these boys tricking him and taking the turkey themselves. They run home while he just watches the whole thing happen. He so longed for their acceptance. He had it for a second, but they tricked him, and the story ends with him remaining in his lonely state, watching the boys run down the street with his turkey.
Gosh, so depressing.
I know. Close it up in prayer.
He was not my favorite author.
She was not.
No.
Flannery O'Connor?
She had a very difficult childhood to start with, so I think probably that may have entered her writing.
She came to faith later on, and that came through some of her writings. But you're right, some of her stuff is dark.
Yeah.
Revelation 17 presents Jerusalem like the boy, desperate and hungry for the world's acceptance. So much so, they'll make a deal with Rome, chasing Christians. You want me to get them? I'll get them for you. And true to form, Rome turns on Jerusalem. Rome doesn't stay in awe and wonder too long. So this will be the first couple verses. So hang with me. All right. So one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality. Those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with wine of her immorality. He carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, or into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead was a name which was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witness of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly." See why? Okay, here's a picture of it. There it is. Riding on the beast. So just so we're straight, I hold that the harlot is apostate Judaism, who was responsible for the death of Jesus and his followers. The beast, and that's not the best, the beast she is sitting on, the one from the sea, being Rome. We can get a little more formal here. Jerusalem is riding, and she is dependent on the imperial city. That's the idea. If we were to go back to Revelation chapter 1, John told these things will happen shortly. That's Revelation 1. These things will happen shortly. And what throws off everybody is, well, how long is shortly? Some people think shortly is 4,000 years from now. Some people think it was within the scope of what John was writing about. So Rome fell in the 400s. From this point, you're going to be given the story of two. There's going to be a harlot and there's going to be a bride. The bride will come down from heaven and stands in stark contrast to the harlot who is riding on the beast. So it would not have been out of the ordinary to refer to God's covenant people as a wayward harlot. Mara, if you don't mind, can you find Isaiah? Isaiah chapter 1, verse 21. And it's also in Jeremiah 2. It's also in Hosea. The main charge against Jerusalem was, you have the prophet's blood. You have killed the messengers I've sent. 121.
How the faithful city has become a whore, she who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers.
Very good. The faithful city has become a harlot, says Isaiah. Jeremiah 2 would say the same terminology and say that you have the prophet's blood. What are we told about everything in this passage? Instead of being a light to the Gentiles, Jerusalem led the kings of the earth astray. That's how Jerusalem is seen in this way. You were supposed to bring others to a saving knowledge of Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God. Instead, you've joined in with them and invited them into the revelry. No longer is John in heaven seeing these things. He's now in the wilderness. The woman was sitting on a scarlet-covered beast. The color given is actually new, but everything else about the beast is the same. 7 heads, 10 crowns. How could this happen to God's covenantal people? Can it happen to us in church? Absolutely. Right. And what we have to do when we read the Old Testament and about those Pharisees is not to say, those crazy Israelites, those crazy Pharisees. That's in our heart too. We can do that. We can do that so easy. So instead of being a light to the Gentiles, she actually encouraged immorality among the nations. That is how. So one other one, Mara, if you don't mind, Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 16, verse 6 and then 14.
And when I passed by you and saw you wallowing in your
And when I passed by you, I saw you wallowing in your blood. I said to you, in your blood, live. I said to you, in your blood, live. And then finally down here, 14. And your renown went forth among the nations because of your beauty, for it was perfect through the splendor that I had bestowed on you, declares the Lord God. God rescues this lady, Israel, makes her beautiful, and she can't handle having the beauty because she can't handle others looking in on her. It becomes kind of prideful. That's the image. The church doesn't do well when the prevailing culture welcomes it. That's kind of the message. We don't do well when the prevailing culture accepts us and says, come on in. We're like the boy with the turkey. We want the people around us to go, oh, you're awesome. You're awesome. We like the affirmation the world gives. We like having the praise of people. We like to be accepted. The story of Ezekiel is that of God adopting a girl no one wanted. He makes her beautiful, and then she takes that beauty and uses it to, well, fill in the blank. Uses it to allure others. This is the image we have here in Revelation. This is why the first century church was so explosive. But then Constantine made it legal. And then it got watered down. And then it got pushed out to the margins. That's why we have the desert monks. They go out in the desert. One of them lived up top of a tree, a monk, and he'd have his disciple, whoever, bring food up to him every day in a roller. But they said, you know what? This is not the real church. This is not it. It's a lukewarm, compromised version. We actually were doing better when they were coming after. That's what they were saying. We actually did better when we were persecuted. John is envisioning the same relationship between the kings of Rome and apostate Jerusalem. Jerusalem's being used. That's why it's the harlotry language. You're being used and you don't know it. Or worse, she knows it and is okay because there's acceptance. So that's where we have. Okay, the next group of verses. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. Remember, Rome is the city of 7 hills, 7 mountains. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss. Now, remember, what was Jesus called? The one who was, the one who is, and the one to be. This is a play. This is a mockery. He's mocking Satan. Oh, yeah, you are not, and you're about to be not. About to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. Those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast. That he was, and there's not, and will come. There he goes, doing it again. John is throwing shade, as it were, to the beast. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th. And he is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. John was amazed at this vision. The angel says, why are you amazed? The mystery of the woman, the beast carrying her, will be fully explained. Remember that we've seen this beast before, has 7 heads, 10 crowns, all that other stuff. So let's talk about this. The beast was at one time, is not now, and will ascend to the abyss. And on its way to perdition, it will make an impressive display. It will be impressive enough to make the reprobate on earth wonder. And if their names are not written down in the book of life, they'll be the kind of people who are impressed by that kind of thing. John mentions this way to describe the beast. John says it twice, that the beast was, is not, and yet is. He's finished in principle, but somehow managing to keep up appearances. The beast is done, but he's somehow able to keep up the appearances, all but done. I hold that as the Roman Empire as of the 1st century because of their immorality, because they were barely hanging on politically. And John gives his readers a riddle, just like the 666 thing. Here is wisdom. The beast is identified in two ways: the 7 heads, that's geographic, and then the 7 kings. Think of it like this. He's identifying Rome geographically and historically. He's talking about the Caesars. And here's the pictures of them. There they are. There's some of them. Of the 7 kings, 5 were already in history books by the time this vision was given: Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius. When John saw this vision, Nero happened to be on the throne, and he was not about to be for too much longer. Nero was the guy. And then Galba. Galba came after him, reigned 7 months. And again, I gave this to you last week. We've had all kinds of political stuff going on, but we have the same president. Imagine 3 in 1 year, and then 7 within 5 years. That's turmoil. Imagine the chaos on the streets. I like this quote from Joel Beek. Any society that forsakes God and roots itself in the here and now will always end in collapse, ruin, and despair. Look at Greece, look at Egypt, look at Rome. We fear that it will happen to our decadent society too, as we ignore God, moving him out of schools, out of public places, and out of even churches. We continue to be intoxicated by the harlot Babylon. The inevitable consequence will be fall, ruin, disaster if we continue to refuse to repent. Civilization is fragile. It does not take much for it to collapse. We pride ourselves on being modern, sophisticated, civilized. Are written for us. Written across the whole world is destruction. Centuries ago, Samuel Rutherford advised Christians to build your nest in no tree here, for you see, God has sold the forest to death. The days of this world are numbered. Babylon the Great is fallen. I would say kind of, but not really, with where that's going. That's more of a pessimistic view. But it's true, the worldly system will die. It can't keep going on. It turns on itself. And that's one of the little things about Revelation. It clearly shows that when evil comes together against God and against his people, it doesn't do it for long. There will be the bad guys fighting one another. It was during the reign of the 8th one where he gave the order for Jerusalem to be done away with, the 8th one. And John is telling the readers, it's about to go down. The beast will turn on the woman. It's about to happen. And this is the final section of the chapter. And the 10 horns which thou safest, I love the King James, are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. They have one mind, and shall give their power and strength to the beast. They shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords, the King of kings. And they who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which now sawest, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, and nations, and tongues. The 10 horns which you sawest on the beast, these shall hate the harlot. Remember, that's what I'm holding out, that here's basically what happened. Well, and will make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree to give their kingdom unto the beast. The words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is the great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Oh, man. So what about these 10 horns? They're subordinate to the heads, but in some manner they are kings. They have real authority, but it's a lesser authority than the 7 kings. And it happens that the city of Rome did have 10 imperial provinces. The number 10 is symbolic, representing a complete number of subordinate governors and kings. But remember, Herod was an example of this kind of lower K king. They ruled a little area. So here is the beast one more time. There you go. The harlot is done. Therefore, I am going to gather all your lovers with whom you found pleasure, those who loved as well as those you hated. I will gather them against you from all around and will put you in front of them, and they will see you stark naked. I will sentence you to the punishment of women who commit adultery and to shed blood. I will bring the blood of vengeance of my wrath and jealous anger. I will deliver you into the hands of your lovers, and they will tear you in your mounds and destroy your lofty shrines. They will strip you of your clothes and take your fine jewelry and leave you stark naked, and they will bring a mob against you, who will stone and hack you to pieces with their swords. They will burn you in your houses and inflict punishment on women. I'll put a stop to your prostitution. You'll no longer pay. The basic setup is this: the waters are many peoples, nations, tribes. The beast arises from these waters, and the great harlot sits upon the beast. The harlot sets upon many waters, ruling over them by means of her alliance with the beast. Okay, so here's what happens. The horns make war on the Lamb, persecuting the Jesus followers, but the whole thing culminates when Rome turns on the woman who is riding on its back, destroying her. The 10 rulers who make war on the Lamb do it ineffectually. They do not succeed because the Lord of Lords and King of Kings is Jesus. Unable to defeat the Lamb or the people, the kings settle for an entity they can defeat, the harlot. They hate her, and when given the opportunity, they wipe her out. That's basically what happens. They go after God's people, realize that they're ineffective and can't do it. They turn on the woman who is riding on her back. And I hold to you that that turning on the woman is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD when it was wiped out.
You can see that within a certain party in this country right now. They're going against each other now. Very important.
Happens a lot. If you go against God and his prescribed will, it's a matter of time. A matter of time. What does Jerusalem have to do with Rome? What are these lessons? Man, this is a dark, dark thing to talk about. But God is glorified by his justice. These kings are wicked, and yet we see a plain statement of God's absolute control over wicked rulers. They cannot prevail over God's people, so they will only prevail over other enemies to the extent that God has determined them to do so. The text here is plain as it can be, for God has put in their hearts to fulfill his will. Amazing, you see this detail. He works through a group of wicked rulers. Amazing. So what does this mean? It means that all the headlines we can point to, we can say, well, God is in that. You can relax. Whatever you see in the global scene that can scare you temporarily, we lean on God's gracious character, knowing that he doesn't wait too long, that he will bring justice. Imagine what the Christians were thinking in that scene in 70 AD. Watching Rome turn and go after Jerusalem. What chaos. The woman was that great city who rules over kings of the earth until she's destroyed by the kings of the earth. The power of Israel is not a political power. The beast was a political power. The woman rode on the beast. Her authority was indirect, wasn't direct. The Jews were God's chosen people. And one commentator says it had to be pretty bad. When they trusted and obeyed God, the whole earth was blessed. When they were disobedient, they fell into unfaithfulness. The Gentile world stumbled into blasphemy. The world's blessing depended on them in one way. Could you say the same thing for the church? Aren't we to be a blessing to the nations? So when we are seeking after God's face, the world should thrive. When we're doing what we're supposed to do, just like Israel in the Old Testament. So let this be a huge lesson for us in the church, called to be salt and light. In one sense, the craziness you read about and see, we're not responsible for it, in one sense. In another sense, had we been obedient, things would have been different. I'm talking about we, capital, like the royal we as a church. If we had done as Jesus has said, go and make disciples, taken that seriously, we wouldn't have these headlines. The Jews were appointed to show the world what blessing for covenant or faithfulness looked like. They were also appointed to show the world what indignation looks like when poured out on the virgin bride. When the virgin bride became a harlot, actually. This image of harlotry taken from the Old Testament refers to covenantal apostasy. So yes, Harlot Jerusalem rode on the back of Rome, but oh my goodness, her position was very precarious. It wasn't a long ride. So be ye separate. You can't leave the world, but you can leave the world spiritually. Revelation 18, 4 and 5, it gives you this warning for God's people. I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out from her, my people, that you may be partakers of her sins. You may not be partakers of her sins, that you receive not any of her plagues, for her sins have reached into heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. It is not possible for us to literally leave this world. We can't separate ourselves physically. We can lock ourselves, we can do that. We can lock ourselves into a monastery, but that doesn't get us any way more away from the world in our hearts. That's why Jesus did not pray that his Father would take Christians out of the world, but he would take the world out of his Christians. That's a very important distinction.
We really have aborted this scripture
Yes.
very much so.
Yes.
Basically, what the church is involved is don't get involved.
Right.
And that's why we're in the condition we're in.
Don't get involved. Stay out. Stay safe.
So-called pure.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's a false way of obeying that command. Lot's wife. There's an example of someone whose heart was dominated by the world. Physically, she left Sodom, but her heart was still in Sodom. She looked back. She was not spiritually separated from Sodom. What God requires of us is a spiritual separation. The warning is, come out from her, my people, that ye may not be partakers of her sins and not receive any of her plagues. It is a possibility to distance ourselves a bit from the world by refraining from some of the big notorious sins. But we can also resort to legalism, making up rules and regulations that go beyond Scripture. The only way we can truly and spiritually come out of the world is through the cross of Christ. That has to be our identity. We are crucified to the world, but yet still in it. And so if there's anything you can get from Revelation 17, it is our tendency to seek the world's approval and the destruction that brings as God's people. You know, wanting acceptance isn't wrong. Making that the idol is wrong. And so we can fall into that. Any questions, anything, any comments or anything like that?
Everybody has to be accepted.
Right.
I think one of the things, any difference in the church than you do actually in the world.
Right.
I mean, from the standpoint, you even see it from the standpoint of divorce.